Hi, today I'm going to talk about why articles are a great resource to use when learning a foreign language, and why they may be the best resources for an intermediate language learner. I'm going to cover a variety of reasons for why I think articles are such a great resource, and each of these reasons that I'm going to mention are big topics of discussion in and of themselves. So I'll probably be making videos in the future explaining each one in more detail. But for now, I'm just going to give a brief overview of each one. So the first point I wanted to make is that articles are a great example of how the language is used in real life. Um, if you compare the language that you find in articles to the types of text that you find in textbooks, for example, uh, most texts that you find in textbooks are, written by the author, or they're pre-prepared. They're tailored to the student. They're tailored to the course, so they have their limitations. And a lot of times when I'm reading textbooks, I feel like a lot of the language is forced. For example, when the textbook will try to include idiomatic expressions, a lot of the times I don't find that the use of those expressions is very natural. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have the language that you find in literature, in novels, which can be incredibly difficult for an intermediate language learner to decode and to work through. So I find articles are a good middle ground because they're written by real people, they're written by journalists, and the language that they use is authentic. It's natural. It's what you would find, on the news, in newspapers, sometimes even in spoken language. Nothing is forced. They're not trying to include X number of vocabulary words in each article that they write. They're not trying to force in idiomatic expressions so that you can learn them more easily. So I find that articles are a great way to expose yourself to the real use of the language, the natural way the language is used. I've started to make a series of videos where I read articles in French, and I translate them line by line. And I've just decided that I'm going to be making such videos for as many languages as possible because I think it's a great exercise. And with regards to the translation, I find that translating articles is useful because it gives you a better sense of understanding of what you're reading. A lot of times when we read something or listen to something in a foreign language and someone asks, "Oh, did you understand that?" We'll say, "Oh, yeah, we understood." But if you actually try to go through word by word and see how much of it you actually understand word for word, you'll be surprised to find that it's more difficult than you thought when you try to translate each word by word and break down the sentence piece by piece. And this is because I think, when someone says, "Oh, did you understand?" we say yes, but it's because we understood just the general sense, we understood the gist of it, But when you go and translate an article, when I say translate, I mean just, I don't mean translate in the more scientific definition of the word. I'm just meaning, translate it from one language to another without paying attention to the more artistic aspects of translation. I find that it forces you to know what you're reading. It forces you to be able to explain each word as it fits into each sentence. And for that reason, I find that reading articles and also translating them, which is what I'm going to be doing, which is what I am doing in these videos that I'm making, it gives you a better clarity of understanding of what you're reading. The next thing I want to talk about is vocabulary. There are many ways that people learn vocabulary. There are many ways that people learn vocabulary, whether it be through vocabulary lists or applications or like games like memorize.com or I don't know, whatever games apps. There are a lot of apps like mind snacks that help you learn vocabulary. But I find the problem with all these is that they lack context. And what I mean by context is, these other sources, they'll give you the word and the definition, and sometimes they'll even give you like a sentence, that the word is used in, but that's not enough context for the brain to retain that information. In an article, say you're reading an article, actually I can give an example. I've just been reading an article about, a French article about bottlenose dolphins. So I've gotten a lot of vocabulary from that regarding, dolphins, the sea, boats, the water life, all those kinds of things, hunting, fishing, those kinds of vocabulary words that you'd normally find, just on a list. They list dolphin, boat, sea, hunter, fisherman. But in an article, the entire article gives you this environment almost to absorb the vocabulary that you're learning about a certain topic. So the next time I see the term, dolphin or fishing or hunting in another context, it's easier for me to draw that connection that, oh, I saw this in that article I read about dolphins. So I find that memorizing vocabulary is all about forming connections. It's much easier when you have, a previous recollection of a word, and then when you see it the next time, and you draw that connection to when you saw it before, it strengthens that bond in your brain. It strengthens that connection, and it's easier to remember that way. So articles, I find, are a very good way to get contextualized vocabulary that you wouldn't find in other ways of learning vocabulary. And this also applies to idiomatic expressions, phrases. Just like I mentioned with vocabulary words individually, there are also phrases that, the author will use, idiomatic expressions that you can obtain from the article, through a similar way with the context. And I find that, just like I mentioned before, if I see one expression in this article and then I read it somewhere else, I'll say, oh, I remember this. He used that expression when he was talking about how the dolphins, live in this ocean, but they move there, so, something like that. Forming the connections is very important to remembering the phrase or words. And going along with this is the grammar. Grammar, a lot of times and what I'm talking about now is related to intermediate language learners. So I'm assuming that if you're an intermediate language learner, you already have some basis of fundamental grammar, and you're able to create and understand simple sentence structures. What articles give you are more complex sentence structures, because the language that's often used in articles is more formal. It's sometimes more scientific, more articulate, more well-spoken. So naturally, you're going to have more complex sentence structures. So how can you use articles to learn grammar? Well, what I find helpful is to kind of memorize the sentences, memorize, a certain sentence structure, because you'll find in an article many examples of long, complex sentences. So just memorize the sentence. And then as you go about doing this, it's important to dissect the sentence into its various parts and understand the role that each word has to play in the sentence. So understand why does this word have an S on it? Oh, it must be plural. Why does this have an A instead of an E? Oh, it must be feminine. Things like that. Why is this verb conjugated that way? Oh, it must be referring to the subject of the last sentence. Things like that. Ask yourself questions about why some words look different than you're used to seeing them. That'll help you understand the role of each word in the sentence. And through that, you'll be able to understand the structure of these sentences. So once you've understood the structure by doing this dissection, you can use the same structure and just substitute out vocabulary words. Substitute out the subject, substitute out the predicate. So using this one complex sentence, you can form, tens even hundreds of sentences depending on how much vocabulary you know. So articles are good for grammar because they have lots of varied sentence structure if you're reading well-written articles, and it's good if you do this dissection of the sentences so you can internalize their structure. So I've mentioned a lot of things, but how are these different aspects, the vocabulary, the grammar, the understanding that I talked about, how is it going to sink in? And the key to all that is repetition. So what I do personally is I'll read an article, I'll read it a lot of times. One thing I really wanted to mention was that articles help build your pronunciation and your fluidity of speech. Why? A lot of times when students are learning foreign languages, they have trouble speaking because as for example, as a native English speaker, our mouths, our tongue, our lips, they're not accustomed to making the sounds that you'd find in, French or Spanish or any other foreign language. So what articles give you are, kind of like dialogues where you can just practice saying the sentence fluidly. So, for example, I don't know, I have this sentence here. Google está desarrollando unos lentes de contacto inteligentes que miden los niveles de glucosa en las lágrimas de los diabéticos. That's the first time I've ever read that sentence. So, I've practiced this method very often, so I was able to say the sentence pretty fluidly. But for a beginning language learner, or for me and in a language like French, for example, where I don't have much experience, or not as much experience, trying to find a French article here. So I'm just going to flip to a random sentence and show you what I mean. Vous êtes moins concentré et pourriez avoir des problèmes de mémoire. Okay, that was pretty good. L'épuisement vous fait perdre votre capacité de focaliser et peut provoquer des pertes de mémoire, ce qui explique pourquoi nous avons tendance à égarer nos objets personnels après une mauvaise nuit de sommeil. So you can see that sentence I just heard was long, it was complex, and I wasn't able to say it very fast or fluidly. I stopped a couple of times on some words like tendance et something else. But the point is, in order to better your pronunciation, fluidity of speech, it's important for your mouth to get used to forming the sounds of the language in a way that is going to be useful when you try to speak. So what I do is I'll take this sentence and I'll say it as many times as I need to until I'm able to say it with good pronunciation and until I'm able to say it fluidly and at a decent speed. Sometimes I'll even try to say it, unnecessarily fast just to test myself. And this really helps because when you try to speak spontaneously with someone and you're trying to have a conversation, first you have to translate what you're going to say from English to the foreign language, and then you have to say it. So, for more beginner students of foreign languages, they'll translate, and then when they try to say it, it'll come out broken, and often with not great pronunciation. So, doing this exercise, just repeating the sentence, will help you with that second part, with the saying of what you need to. It'll help the words leave more easily from your mouth. And also, it's a great way to practice pronunciation. And what's important though is you can't do this passively. You have to do it actively and notice when you're making mistakes in pronunciation. So you have to know that, this isn't the right way to say this word, or I missed this liaison here. And this is why I say it's a good resource for the intermediate language learner, because the beginner language learner is not often going to know when he's making mistakes or not with pronunciation. So for the intermediate language learner, I would assume has had, lots of audio input and has been exposed to the correct pronunciation of the language to an extent that they're able to understand, when they make a certain mistake with pronunciation. So I highly recommend doing this exercise, practice saying the article fluidly. And you can even do, you can make it a game for yourself, Try to read the entire article or the entire paragraph without stopping. And if you stop, you have to start over and try again. It's a great way to get the fluidity of speech. So this ties into my last point, which is how to get this all to sink in, how to get the grammar, the vocabulary, the pronunciation, how to get all of that to sink in. And the key is repetition. What you have to do essentially when you read articles, or what I do is, I just reread them over and over again. So, I'll read them once, and this, you may think it sounds boring, but you may have once you've gone through all these steps, trying to get as much vocabulary as you can from it, trying to get through as much, trying to absorb as many sentence structures as you can from it, trying to pronounce it as fluidly as possible as many times as you can. After you've completed all those steps, you've probably already gone through the article at least 10 times, at least. So, your brain has already absorbed a lot of the aspects of language that are inside the article. So, repetition is really the key, because, like I said before with the vocabulary, you have to know, you have to understand the context of the words that you're learning. You have to understand the context of the grammar, the sentence structures that you're learning, so that when you see them in another place somewhere, if you're reading another newspaper or something, your brain will remember that you read it in this article, and you'll be able to form that connection. So repetition is really the key. So how do you practice repetition? Just read it a bunch of times. Read it. Like I said, you go through all these steps. You would have read it 10 times already. Then wait a couple of days, read it again. Review all the words that maybe that you had underlined at the beginning that you didn't know. So review those words. Read some sentences that you found had interesting structure. Reread some sentences that you find you had trouble saying. There are lots of ways to repeat, but the key is, in order to effectively utilize articles as a means of learning, you have to really squeeze out as much as you can from it. You have to take out the vocabulary, the idiomatic expressions. You have to take out the grammar, the sentence structures, the pronunciation. Just squeeze as much out of that article as you can. So by the time you've completely digested the article, you've increased your knowledge by so much. Like this French article here, this is like a 4 or 5 page article. Once I finished working through this article, I would have acquired a lot of experience in French, and it's a lot more fun than if I had studied a vocabulary list of 50 French words, the same 50 that I didn't know that were in here, that I learned through reading it and understanding the context. It's a lot more fun doing this than learning from a textbook or a list or something. So one more thing is time. How long is it going to take me to get through an article like this? Who knows, I'm busy during the week, so I may only be able to get through a page a day or even a paragraph a day. It depends. But time should not be your primary concern. The primary concern should be getting through it thoroughly. Because if you go through a paragraph, if your goal is just to get through as many articles as you can, you're not going to, like I said before, you're not going to squeeze as much out of it as you can. So there's no point in doing that. Just go through the articles as slow as you need to, so that you're able to absorb as much information as you can from them. So that's all I have to say. This is kind of a justification for why I'm making these series of videos where I read articles. So I hope you're able to apply some of these techniques that I've talked about in your own language learning. Thank you.